Good evening, everyone. This is Moshe Frank tonight with Dr. Gordon Dale, visiting assistant professor of ethnomusicology at HUC, Jewish Institute of Religion of New York City, right? Did I get that right?
That's right.
So myself as a musician and as an art peddler, people always ask the question, what is considered Jewish music? And for that matter, what's considered Jewish art? But since you're the music professor, I guess we'll focus on how do you classify Jewish music, period?
It's a great question. It's a really challenging question. There's a musicologist, famous musicologist named Kurt Sachs, who defined Jewish music as music by Jews, for Jews, as Jews. Now, that's a really interesting definition. And in some ways, it's a very narrow definition of what Jewish music is. That excludes, for example, anybody who's not Jewish from making Jewish music. It excludes music that is highly Jewish in content, but is performed for people who are not Jewish. And it excludes music. I don't really know what it means to do something as a Jew, but if it's not that, then Kurt Sachs's definition doesn't work. I think it's very hard to put parameters on what is or is not Jewish music. So what I like to do is to think of Jewish music as a discourse, and to say, if a piece of music or an artist is described as Jewish music or a Jewish musician, in what ways can this music be thought of as Jewish? And how is it functioning socially as Jewish? What does that mean in a given social context? And that sort of opens up lots of interesting questions that to me are much more interesting than trying to create some objective definition of what is Jewish music, because you can see instead, how is this music functioning as Jewish, and what does it do for people as a result of that? And what does it do for people if somebody wants to describe it as not Jewish music? Like what's at stake when people make those claims? So that's a long way of saying that there's no one good definition of what Jewish music is, but I do think that there's still utility in having a term Jewish music, because it enables to think more deeply about how certain music is functioning as Jewish. And I was once speaking to a very respected sociologist, and he said, the sociologists can't define what society is. Economists can't define what capital is, but that doesn't really stop us from making pretty good observations about it anyway. So I think I kind of take that approach.
What it seems to be accepted in the Jewish world. Now, I guess Jewish music from an academic perspective genre, like you said, maybe it's hard to quantify or describe or pin it down, but it seems from a Jewish religious, I guess, a need or parameters, ultra-Orthodox Haredi people only listen to Jewish music as a religious, rule. I'm not sure how you describe it. So in that case, I think what you quoted that professor, for Jews, by Jews, for Jews, as Jews, I think really classifies it, because when I think of it growing up in yeshiva, where listening to secular music was a big no-no, for the spiritual, I guess, elements and issues of it. So I get, since from a Hasidic perspective, what I understand is that the person who composes a song and you sing it or listen to it, you connect to that person. So you want to be connecting in a deep emotional way with people who are of refined character and character that you respect, and follow those people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I totally understand what you're saying. There's a long discourse of saying that, you know, music is a very spiritual, very deep, deeply attached to the soul thing that we do, right? And the output of it is very connected to sort of a core idea of who a person is, and therefore the music is somewhat colored by that person's neshama, like who that person is sort of indelibly marked onto the nigun, right? And so that that comes through. And one of the really interesting ideas that sort of emerges from that, and this is certainly true in Chabad, is this idea of musical tikkun. There's a great book by an ethnomusicologist named Ellen Koskoff called "Music in Lubavitcher Life." I don't know if you've seen this book, but she has a chapter in there called in which she talks about.
To check it out.
Yeah, check it out. It's a great book. And it was, she writes about musical tikkun, but that's the idea about pieces of music that don't originate in Jewish sources, right? And in those cases, she describes it as a 4-step process. I need to go back to the book and remember exactly how she outlines it, but the gist of it is that a very holy person, like a Rebbe, needs to come and to masakein the nigun, right? And what that does is it essentially strips it of any coarse elements and brings it to the side of kedusha, and from there the music can therefore be used because it's been separated from anything that the Rebbe would not want to be part of the lives of the Hasidim. So so that idea does come about. The other thing that's interesting, though, is what do you do about pop music? Because this ends up, I mean, it can be, I hesitate to use this word, but almost weaponized, right? To say that somebody is not holy enough if they're, you know, and someone can cast aspersions on an individual by saying your music is not Jewish enough. And that's not just saying something about the music, it's therefore saying something about the artist who created it, right? Because of exactly the paradigm that you described. So in popular music, we get some really interesting outcomes that come from this discourse. So it becomes a thing of how do you make music that symbolizes that you yourself are actually holy enough to be the one making the music.
So then the question is genre make it Jewish, or is the person who composed it Jewish?
So I would put that back to you, right? Because that it goes back to your to the paradigm that you described, and that maybe the same one that Kurt Sachs was describing. I'm not sure. So I don't know. What do you think? Is genre a qualification, or is it more about the person's intent?
Because I interviewed a few weeks ago Nissan Black, you know, the black Hasidic rapper,
Sure.
Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. I didn't directly ask him this question, but I touched on this idea, like, you know, what makes something Jewish. But definitely moving over, genre of music, definitely, like rap music is typically, or heavy metal, or certain music is clearly very not religious by nature of its, I don't know, I'm not a music academic like yourself, but there's something about it that's very rebellious, right? Not contracted or conservative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying. So then the question becomes,
like, you think classical music is quote unquote more religious than heavy metal? In terms of refinement of what?
Right. Okay. Okay. So I hear what you're saying.
Or let's say you're in a shul, right? You're more likely to do a classical music piece than a rap in any.
So I'll tell you, just, you know, on a personal level, what I would sort of connect with more is to say that I'm more interested in a person's intent than necessarily the genre in which they're operating. So, for example, when I mean, classical music in a shul is an interesting thing because so much classical music is really was commissioned by individuals connected with the Catholic Church, and you have a lot of questions. Therefore, right? Is that an appropriate thing to be performing in a shul? I'm not a rabbi. I'm not going to be answering those kinds of questions. I'm just raising the issue based on the history of the music, right? So if so that's why I would hesitate to say that the classical music is automatically going to be more appropriate than rap music, right? I mean, I think what Nissan Black is doing is a wonderful thing. I like what he's doing. I think it's cool. The other thing I want to say, though, is that the idea of classical music being more refined than, say, rap music or any other genre of music, I mean, that idea is really connected to a lot of discourses that have to do with what groups of people are more refined than other groups of people. And those discourses make me very uncomfortable. And so I would, so that's another reason to maybe push back against that kind of discourse.
Would you say, I mean, naturally, I think there is science behind it. People who listen to heavy metal are more likely to, I don't know, I do believe there are science behind it. Certain music is very rebellious by nature. So if you're rebellious by nature, there's some connection between the type of music. Loud, blaring music is more rebellious than some guy on a quartet and a jazz set, You're not going to go into disco, a club, and they're going to some three guys, a saxophone, upright bass, and a piano. Just not, However, people going crazy on a dance floor, it's more likely to be rap or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, and
you know what I'm saying?
I totally hear what you're saying. The question is, how do we define rebellious, right? I mean, jazz was considered rebellious for a very long time, and there's a big history having to do with jazz and discourses of really problematic things. And so a lot of it depends somewhat on context. But even if you're saying it has to do with the sonic qualities of the music, which I think is the point that you're making. So yeah, I mean, I don't know about the like science of it, because there have been a lot of kind of like bogus studies that try to prove certain things having to do with how music genres work. So I just can't comment on that. But yeah, I mean, look, some music is more aggressive than other music for sure. So again, it's kind of all about, for me at least, it's all about what you do with it, right? Can you use a certain art form to express something holy? That's a really interesting question, right? Can you use an art form that is that many people consider to be profane to do something holy? And I think that is a question that exists for musicians. It's a question I think that exists for a lot of different artists. So I don't know. I think that's a Sarachiyun, right? We need to continue to explore that one.
What's Jewish religious practice connection to music? So I guess going back, the Beis Hamikdash had the Levium playing music, correct?
Yeah.
And they had singing and brass, I guess. What was it? Trumpets or?
Yeah, they had a lot of different instruments. Yeah, they had trumpets. Yeah, I mean.
So could you give us a little background of the first time Jewish music shows up in Jewish history? And in what way is it part of the service? Is it an add-on? Is it if you don't mind elaborating as a professor of Jewish music.
Sure. I mean, it's a huge question. So on one foot, here we go. Well, I mean, music is discussed right in the beginning of the Torah. Yuval is described as the originator of musical instruments. So, right from the beginning, we have a connection to music. Now, people read sources of having to do with music and Tanakh in different ways. There are scholars who write about this in really fascinating ways. I recommend my friend Ari Tepper's article, "The Problematic Power of Music in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible." He has a really, really interesting, compelling reading of music. But we see, though, once we get into the prophets, it's very clear that music is connected to prophecy. Many prophets needed music to facilitate the experience of prophecy. So it was clearly seen as an important spiritual tool at that time. And as you said, in the Beis Hamikdash, there was music that was done to accompany the sacrifices. And so it kind of continued through there. Now, we have very little record of what the music itself was like. There are people who have tried to reconstruct this. There's a book called Music in Ancient Israel by Sendri is the name of the author. And so you can read the sources and you see that music is crucial. There are 10 songs described in Tanakh also, and this is, Kabbalists have some really interesting readings on what this might mean also. So all through the sources we see music referenced. Once the Jewish people go into exile after the destruction of the temple, as the Psalms say, they hung up their lyres, and musical instruments were forbidden for a long time. And people have interpreted those halachas differently. There's some really interesting articles about that. There's a Rabbi Kahn in Brooklyn who wrote a really interesting article about different understandings of the halachas of musical instruments and what exactly are the parameters of the Isser.
Well, until today in Yerushalayim, many people don't have music at their wedding, like a little choir and the drums. I remember.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes back to that idea. Obviously, in other places, they took a more relaxed stance towards those rulings. But it's clear that the music of the Jewish communities in different places took on the characters of the surrounding areas, which is natural. That's how these things go. And so, if you fast forward throughout history, you'll find that, of course, even today, the Jews from Morocco are making music that sounds like Moroccan music, and the Jews from Europe are doing the same thing, and that's what happened throughout the history. So, I mean, there's a lot to say. There are thousands of years of Jewish music history, but to answer your question, yeah, music is described right from the beginning in the Hebrew Bible, and we see it all throughout Tanakh and into the Talmud. Straight
the
to
Jewish music that the Levium did, what was its purpose or connection to the sacrifices? Was it a happy music, or slow music, or sad, or?
That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I don't know. I heard a really interesting Dvar Torah just this past week for last week's Parsha in Baaloscha that was talking about, in the beginning of the Parsha, we read about, Rashi quotes in Medrash, it says that Aaron was upset because he didn't get to participate in the inauguration of the Mishkan, and Rashi quotes this, then Ramban asks a question like, what's going on with this? Why was he upset? And the Shem Shmuel has an interesting answer, and he says that the idea was that as the leader of the so he knew that because he was the Kohen Gadol, he was going to be participating in bringing godliness down to this world, but he wanted to still have a share in the job of the Levium as the musicians to be the ones to elevate this world up. And so so this is a really interesting idea, as someone interested in music, that there's this idea that music has the ability to raise up this world, whereas there are other forces, such as what he was doing in his with his Kohen Gadol hat on, literally, to bring the upper world down to this world. So these are ideas that we find. Obviously, this was in a Hasidic source, but the idea is around that clearly whatever the Levium were doing, it was very, very powerful, and it was indispensable to what was happening in the Beis Hamikdash.
When they say Hasidim sort of reinvigorated music in Judaism in the Orthodox world, what does that mean? It means until the Baal Shem Tov, because of that music ban in memory of the Beis Hamikdash, we didn't do music, so it wasn't like music wasn't a thing, or they gave an extra push, the Hasidim, over the non-Hasidim at the time?
So it's a really good question. It's a little hard to know. But we know that the Vilna Gaon was also into music. So there was music going on. We also need to understand, and this is a question, what did they mean by reinvigorated music? It's a trope that we hear often, but what exactly does that mean? It's really hard to know. One thing that we can say is that the Baal Shem Tov clearly was very interested in prioritizing tefillah, and the idea was that prayer should be an ecstatic experience. It should be something that was really emotional, and something that was deeply spiritual, and that people got excited about. And music, as anybody who's been in an experience in which music is emphasized in prayer, it really does that. It can really make a person get excited to have that state of mind, in that environment. So I think that it seems, at least from what we know, that what it means is that he was emphasizing the use of music during tefillah, and that was the innovation.
Is there a known oldest Jewish song? Does that exist? Like, this song is the oldest Jewish song that you know
about? Well, the Torah is described as a song, and I guess there's no Jews before the Torah, right? So I guess that would be the one.
They say, this. I heard people saying, this thing they sing in the Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim, like this tune or that tune. But you can't think of any tune that's specific that has the most antiquated, I don't know what the right word is, the oldest song that's known to Jewish people.
Great question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if anybody knows the answer, but I'm interested to know if anybody can. I know
in the Chabad circles, we know songs from, I guess, 200 years ago, from the Balatani, the Alter Rebbe, but I don't know what's considered like, in the what's dated to where,
Right. So, we have sheet music that's older than that, also from Jewish sources. So, we can go back quite a ways, but in terms of saying this melody is the oldest melody that we have, I just don't know the answer to that. There are many things that are described as Misinai melodies, but that's actually it's a misleading term. Most of that is from actually medieval Ashkenaz, in Germany, Central Europe. So when people say that the melody is Misinai, it generally doesn't actually mean that it was given at Har Sinai.
And medieval is what year?
Oh, I don't know when these melodies were necessarily given. Medieval, we often think of as ending in like the mid 15th century or so.
And there's songs now in the Jewish world that's from them?
Yeah, there are some that are like that. They say that some high holiday melodies are from there, but without looking it up, I would hesitate to give you an exact example because I'd want to check it out. But you can read about this. It's on my shelf behind me somewhere. There's a book by Edelson, Avraham Zvi Edelson, that talks about Misinai melodies. So that's an interesting source.
Like you said, what you said is interesting, that ultimately every Jewish community, whatever country they're in, their music was very much affected in their style and their genre. You know, Sephardic Mizrahi music has the flavor and the taste of, you would be hard to differentiate between Jewish Middle Eastern music and non-Jewish. Do you, when it comes to like Jewish current, like, you know, the past 50 years Jewish music, would you say you could hear distinctively that, let's say, Shlomo Carlebach or Ben Schenker is distinctively Jewish? Is there anything about it is distinctively Jewish, or it could pass for another genre?
Well, so that's a really interesting question. I mean, when you talk about Carlebach or Ben Schenker, I mean, many of their pieces, so first of all, many of their pieces have words and are liturgy. So that's, you know, that's obviously a distinctively Jewish thing. If you're to say to me, can you, you know, just pull out a random melody without words from one of these composers, can you definitely tell that it's Jewish? Not always. Often you can. And one of the features, there's a lot of talk about this in the Jewish music scholarship, but there are different scales that are used that are common to Jewish liturgical music, to Nusach, and also to like klezmer music. We're talking mostly about Ashkenazi music right now, because you talked about Carlebach and Schenker. And so they tend to use a lot of those modes that were and are common to Nusach, klezmer music, etc.
Or minor scales?
Not all. So there are three modes, main modes that are used in the in Nusach, the way that they're talked about, and there's some sort of variations on them. They're known according to often liturgical terms. So one of them is called Ahava Rabbah, also known as Freygish. One of them is known as Magen Avot, which is essentially a minor scale, but with certain idiomatic phrases attached to it. And the other one is known as Hashem Malach, which is kind of like a Mixolydian scale. And on the upper octave, you get a minor third. So there are some so sorry, I'm getting myself back on track. So you often hear those things in Jewish music, but is that necessarily going to give it a Jewish sound? Not necessarily. I mean, Freygish has an equivalent in the Arab Maqam system. It's known as Hijaz. And so, you know, there's a lot of musical overlap depending on the Jewish communities. So I would hesitate to say that something definitely could be identified as Jewish music all the time, 100%.
You're saying if it's on a certain scale, then it's likely, or more likely, or less likely.
I mean, I guess so. I guess it's often more likely, right? If I hear something that is going to have certain patterns that are familiar because of Jewish music, it's very often going to be associated with Jewish musicians and certain styles. But again, we're coming back to that question that we started with. You know, you're saying, can we identify it as Jewish music? And I started off by saying, well, I don't really know what Jewish music is anyway. So we get back to the definition.
All right, but you're saying that technically there is some strong associations and trends of Jewish music to be in certain scales in contemporary Jewish music, or just in Nusach specifically, or both?
In both. So I guess what I would say is that in Nusach, a lot of that music carried over to Nigunim, and Nigunim carried over to Karlbach and Schenker. So you're asking about that. However, once we get into things like popular music, things become a little bit more vague, because the process of picking up the musical trends from the surrounding communities continued in New York City as well, right? So Mordechai Ben David's music is, his early music was, and it was controversial, right? Because it was picking up a lot of those like disco sounds. So if you extracted the words and you extracted sort of Yiddish inflections in the singing style and things like that, and you just played me the melodies and the harmonies, would I necessarily know that all of that music is Jewish? Not necessarily, because a lot of the popular music has adapted the styles of the surrounding communities. So in that sense, it can be hard to tell. But again, those things like the words, the inflections, the singing style, those are all important also. And those are sort of sonic markers of Jewishness within the music. So you get into the semiotic game of how do you symbolize Jewishness within the music. So that becomes very interesting when you get into popular music. What does Jewishness sound like within a popular music genre? And musicians do interesting things with that to make it come through.
Teaching at HUC, I'm just curious, how much of the traditional Haredi songs ended up into the Reform Nusach? And has it gone the other way? I'm just wondering if it ever...
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the first question first. How much has gone through? If more than you might expect, I guess, is the answer. Everybody, all of my students know Mizmor LeDavid by Ben and Schenker. Some of these very famous tunes people know and sing, and they're common. Have things gone the other way? Yeah, actually, things have. But we need to take a sort of broader view of what Reform music is. So, I mean, there are Reform back in Europe, in Germany, had melodies from composers like people like Zolzer and Lewandowski that have entered into sort of mainstream Jewish practice. So, the melody for Shema that most people sing, and teach their children, Shema Yisrael, right? That's a melody from Zolzer, who is a Reform cantor. And it's just, it's what everybody sings now. So these things, so yes, it does flow the other way. And then more recently, Debbie Friedman's Havdalah melody is very, very common. And you'll hear that in...
Which one's that?
That's
not Kavach?
No, it's Debbie Friedman. Yeah. So yeah, it does. It flows in lots of directions. Music is cool like that, right? That it can sort of cross boundaries.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that Havdalah thing is for sure, I don't know. Very interesting. Now, in the past, I would say 10 years, the idea of a kumsitz has really been super popularized throughout the Haredi world, even in the non-Hasidic circles, because it seemed like, I would say in general, there's this, until today, Hasidim are more comfortable and respect music more than non-Hasidim. I always find it funny that all these choirs are always Hasidim. I don't know why. It just happens to be that all these, and most of the Hasidic, I would say a bigger majority of the singers of the Haredi world are more likely to be Hasidic than not, like the popular, let's say, Benny Friedman, Avraham Mordechai David.
Yeah.
Look at their beard size and you can see their association. I would say there's a bigger majority which doesn't reflect the quantity of people, in their circles. But for whatever reason, I don't know why, the Hasidim seem to take a much bigger role in Orthodox Haredi Jewish music today?
Hmm. That could be. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I just offhand, you're probably right.
Like the famous Chazan girl, like Halfka, these seems to be.
Right.
I
So
think there's accepted sociological norm and respect for music in the Hasidic world as opposed to the Yeshiva world. That, if you're having a father, he's not sending you to music school, he'd rather send you to learn the Gemara. The
yeah,
Hasidic world seems to be more accepting, promoted, and valued, perhaps. What do you think?
I think you're probably right. Um, I, I maybe one element to that. There's probably a lot of dimensions to it, but one element to that is that nearly every Hasidic community, at least that I know of, has a canon of nigunim that belong to that Hasidus, and they become important identity markers for the Hasidim, right? And within every community, there are experts in the music, right? That know all the nigunim and know the story behind every piece, and they know, it was composed for this occasion, and this is the person who did, and this person who first sang it. And you can find it on this recording. There are bootleg copies of the records, right? And I think that stuff is so cool. I think that it's like really neat that each community has their music. So singing that music, therefore, kind of helps you to I guess it's sort of two dimensions, which maybe it's the same thing. I guess it depends on your perspective, right? So there's an idea in Hasidic texts that singing a nigun helps you to connect to the Rebbe, right? Especially helps you to connect to the composer, as you said, and often it might help you to connect to the Rebbe as well. And so in Hasidic communities, I mean, this is a very, very valued thing, right? To connect to your Rebbe is a very important value, whether it's a community where the Rebbe is someone you can go to physically in person and talk to or not. So I think that in that sense, music is not just like a tolerated activity. It's really a very much valued activity. It's something that is seen as spiritually beneficial and an appropriate way to continue your avoda in life. So I hear those discourses much more in Hasidic communities than in Litvish communities, but there are plenty of great Litvish singers as well. So it's not like it's absent, for sure not. And as you said, kumsitzen are very big among the yeshiva kids also. So it does happen there, but I think that in the Hasidic world, it's probably rooted a bit more deeply.
The idea of kumsitzen exists in the Reform community, not conservative, or not so much?
It does exist. Yeah. Especially in the camp world. Summer camps are a very big thing for non-Orthodox Jews. And so they have kumsitzen there. And
what do they call it?
They call it kumsitz, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they might call it that. I don't know. Sometimes they'll just call it like ruach, right? Like it's we're going to have ruach now, and that's what that means. It's essentially a kumsitz. But there's also, at HUC for the past 10 years, they had a kumsitz for Debbie Friedman's yahrzeit every year. And they call it Debbie Friedman kumsitz. And yahrzeit kumsitz. So I remember one particular evening, it was very interesting because I went straight on the subway from the Debbie Friedman kumsitz to a Majitzer yahrzeit suda. And like I didn't even go home first. Like it's like straight there. And
what contrast.
Yes and no, right? That's what's cool about it, is that like for sure, obviously there's a very big contrast in some ways. And in other ways, it's really neat to see like in both of these Jewish communities, singing the music to remember somebody who's no longer with us is a really valued and powerful activity. So, I like to think about those things as connection points between different parts of Klal Yisrael. And of course, there are differences and there are disagreements, whatever. But just to know that both communities are remembering beloved figures through their music is, for me, really powerful.
What I'm just from an academic, or I don't know if this exists. What makes a song popular? Is there like a scientific or mathematical, or probably better category of what makes a song popular, or is there a spiritual element to it? Like,
You're saying, like, when you say what
what
makes it
makes a
popular, are you
song a
saying,
hit? You know, there's a hit song. Like, what makes it a hit?
oh,
What, is
I
there
don't
a
know.
mathematical? Is there like studies about it or anything like that?
Not that I know of. I mean, no, I mean, what makes it a hit? I don't think that there's one formula for that, either on the composition side nor on the marketing side. I think that it's what makes it a hit often is a lot of luck and grinding the pavement to make it happen. So it's a combination of a catchy song, a lot of luck, and a lot of hard work. So I don't know. I can't give a better answer to that than that.
You teach cantors and HUC or rabbis or both?
So my classes are all for our cantors, and occasionally I have the good fortune to teach the rabbinical students in like less formal settings. So sometimes I'll be asked to give Divrei Torah and just do different types of teaching, and so sometimes I get to do that. And I've also advised a few of their theses as well, of the rabbinical and cantorial students write master's theses, and I've supervised a few rabbinical ones.
Do all cantors read notes?
Do all the cantors read notes? Oh yeah, yeah.
You have to read notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an admissions requirement to be able to read music pretty well.
Right, because in the Orthodox shul, I'm assuming a lot of the cantors do not read music.
Probably not, but I mean, I would not say that that's a reason to knock them, because I think that there have been many great musicians who learn music by ear, and I think that's a fantastic thing. I mean, that's a lot of the you mentioned the Hasidic cantors now. A friend of mine, a really good scholar named Jeremiah Lockwood, is studying this movement of Hasidic cantorial revival, and it's fascinating because a lot of these guys, like the Lemmers, for example, and there are a number of others who have gotten into these old records of cantorial music and just absorb it, and they learn every krecht, every little nuance in the music, in the phrasing. They pick it up by ear, and they can do it really well. So I think it's a beautiful thing.
I know you're writing a book on Ben Zion Shenker, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Just to give a little background, Ben Zion Shenker is composer of probably one of the most famous Jewish liturgy, is that the right word? Songs, such as Eishes Chayil?
Yeah.
Eishes Chayil Mizmor David also, right?
Yeah.
Are that his two top favorites? Famous?
Those are probably his two most famous, but he has a lot of others too.
What else?
Is Yushalayim Birachamim Tashu. That's his. He has a lot of famous pieces.
Well, I would say the top two is Mizmor David and Eishes Chayil.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah.
And you knew him, is that correct?
I did. Yeah. I was very fortunate to get to know him.
So could you tell us a little bit about what your book is and your relationship with him? And was this a job, or he had a business otherwise, or like what's his background?
Sure. So he was a fascinating character, a wonderful person, very generous, very kind. So Ben Zion Shenker was born in 1925 in Williamsburg. His parents were recent immigrants to the United States from Poland. You'll have to see the book. So the book, by the way, just to answer that first, the book is going to be in two parts. One is a biography, and then the second is an edit. It's a collection of his 446 nigunim that he wrote.
Wow.
Yeah.
So written up.
Yeah, written out. Yep.
Was it? Well, did you have to write it out, or was it already written?
So he wrote it out. He wrote everything by hand, and then he worked with the Majitzer Chassid in Israel to put it all into finale to have it in computer notation. So I'll be kind of going through everything, making sure that it's all accurate. It's hopefully, God willing, going to be published by Hebrew University, their Jewish Music Research Center. But to go back to Schenker, so as I said, he's born in 1925. He was born in Williamsburg. And
what makes it interesting is that the songs he made, you think were created 500 years ago, and really are only created in the past 100. These songs are so, whether integral or classical, I don't know what the right word is, that makes them so unique.
They're deeply embedded in Jewish life today. Yeah. So to make a long story short, he was a very talented musician from a very early age. He performed music on Yiddish radio when he was a young kid, starting at around age of bar mitzvah.
Performing, singing, playing?
Singing. He was singing liturgical music, cantorial music, Yiddish songs on the radio, which he had to get permission from his Rebbe, Rav Pam, from Torah V'das, when he was in order to do that. So anyway, when he was a young man, I think at about age 15, I have to check my notes, he met the Majitzer Rebbe. The Majitzer Rebbe came to the United States. He fled the war, and his first Shabbos in America, he had the Majitzer Rebbe. This is the Imre Shaul Yedid Taub. He had a very circuitous route to flee the Nazis. He made it to Brooklyn. I'm really abbreviating here. It's a fascinating story. And Rabbi Schenker happened to be there. He was, as I said, a young teenager at the time. And the Rebbe heard him singing. There was a little book out that had some notation of the Rebbe's Nigunim. It had made it to America before the Rebbe did. And it was sitting there on a table. And so Ben Zion Schenker, who knew how to read music because he had been in a boys' choir as a young kid, opened up the book and he started humming to himself some of the Nigunim. And the Rebbe heard somebody singing his pieces of music. So he said, "Who is that?" And Ben Zion popped out and he had a little conversation with the Rebbe. And to make a long story short, he ended up becoming the Rebbe's musical secretary. Whenever the Majitzer Rebbe had a new composition, and even old compositions, Ben Zion Schenker would write out the notation for it. And Majitz, for anybody who doesn't know, is known for their music. They have an amazing, very extensive musical.
Do they have any hit songs?
In Majitz? Oh, Majitz has a lot of famous songs. That's another.
What's their most famous? Just off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head,
I always hear Majitz's music, but I never knew like this song, this famous song, like Schenker. You could say this famous song.
Right. So first of all, a lot of people consider Schenker's music to be Majit's music, like they're one and the same. But a famous one by one of the Rebbes is ba 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 bum 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 bum. People do it for Kel Adon, people do it for Shem Plus. That's one. There are many. Anyway,
I'm sorry, we're going a little off topic. I just always hear Majit's music, but I never actually.
You don't know which ones are which.
Exactly. It doesn't identify.
Right. So, but it's not just the music itself. First of all, they have a lot of great Nigunim, but they also have a lot of writings about music in Majitz also, about the sort of Chassidus of music. So that's another connection that they have. Anyway, Ben Zion Schenker went on he sort of absorbed the musical canon from the Majitzer Rebbe, and he ended up becoming a composer himself, as I said, and he put out the first record of Hasidic music in 1956. So that was a really sort of landmark, very important first ever record
before Nichoach Chabad music.
Yeah. So the Chabad records came about amidst a flurry of activity that happened after Ben Zion's record came out. So the Ben Zion Schenker record comes out in 56. And it was he didn't know if he was allowed to do it. He had to go and ask a Shiloh, and he put out this record. The Rebbe hesitated, but then gave his consent to do the record. And then after people saw that it was successful and a lot of people liked it, it set off this flurry of musical preservation. Keep in mind, this is shortly after the Holocaust, so there was danger of a lot of this repertoire, dying out. And so these preservation activities took place, and it really
Is this album still around? Could you hear it?
Yeah, you can find it for sure. Yeah,
you just made me very curious to hear it. Okay.
Yeah, you can find
the first Hasidic album. Okay.
Yeah, go check it out. And I mean, there's, whatever. I have a lot to say about all of this. Obviously, I'm writing a book about it,
Right.
but I'm abbreviating right now. So anyway, he went on to compose a lot of very important a lot of important nigunim. But yes, he did have a job also. At first, he went into his father's sweater business in Williamsburg, and then later he went into the diamond industry, like a lot of Hasidim at the time. And there are a lot of stories about that. He used to travel a lot for business, but he always was, throughout that, he was an amazing Baal Tefillah. People, would walk in miles to come hear him lead davening.
How many years do you know him?
I knew him 4 years, the last 4 years of his life, from 2012 until 2016. And we became
working on the book with him?
So he actually didn't want, well, I'll say this. I did a number of interviews with him, and my dissertation that I wrote had a chapter that was mostly about his music. And so he read the first draft of my dissertation chapter, and he approved of it, and he was very happy with it. So that now I'm taking that research and I'm sort of expanding upon it and putting it into the book. So we did that, but he didn't want to publish his sheet music during his lifetime because he kind of thought it was an evil eye kind of thing, and he was a little bit afraid of that, or cautious of it, let's say. So he ended up, he was always leading davening in the Majester shuls, first in Crown Heights and then later in Flatbush, and then and he.
You know where in Crown Heights the Majester shul is, or no?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have it somewhere.
Yeah, I live in Crown Heights.
Yeah, he lived in Crown Heights for a long time. And there was also, by the way, a very close connection between Chabad and Majets going back to Europe also. So there was a town called Otvusk, where there was both a Chabad yeshiva and a Majetzer yeshiva. And at one point in Poland, yeah, at one point the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe was there, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was there, and the Majetzer Rebbe was there also. So they got to know each other. And there's a story, I have the details somewhere, but that there was an event happening in Crown Heights, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was not well enough to go, and so the Majetzer Rebbe went to be sort of a presence to honor the day and the activity. And it was at that event, this is what Rabbi Schenker told me, that he first sang the famous Majetzer Ani Mamin, which was composed by Azrael David Fastag, who was a Majetzer Chassid. And after that, the Rebbe took every opportunity to publicize this nigun, which is how Ani Mamin became so popular today.
Which one?
So,
Ani Mamin. That's a Majetzer too.
Yeah, it was written by a Majetzer Chassid, Israel David Fastag.
So that's probably the most famous Majetzer song.
That could be. It's interesting though, because that one wasn't written by one of the Majetzer Rebbes, and most that are in the canon were written by a Rebbe, but there are a handful of other, they call court composers in the community who also wrote music as well, and Fastag was one of them. He has a lot of other really great songs too. So yeah, so writing the book is a lot of fun, and hoping to be done with the first draft of it by the end of the summer, and God willing, it'll see the light of day one day.
Do a book tour?
I don't know about a book tour, but maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll do another episode when that comes up.
Well, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Chat. I have to give your whole title in. Thank you so much to Dr. Gordon Dale, visiting assistant professor of ethnomusicology. You know, it was my first time saying this word was at the beginning of this interview at HEC, at Jewish Institute of Religion. Wow. Thank you so much. And if people want to, and then people want to read the book when it comes out, it's the name of the, you know, the name of the book Final?
No, the name of the book is not Final, but probably the something like The Life and Complete Works of Rabbi Ben-Zion Shenker.
Right, or if you just Google Dr. Gordon Dill, put on your Google alerts, so when it comes out, you will be notified, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And great. Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be.
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, a lot of ground. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. And this video hopefully will be available on YouTube afterwards. All the best.
Okay. All right. Be well. Thank you.